Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk About House. I'm Todd.
I'm Juana.
Okay, today we are going to talk about rent control, specifically this proposal to cap rents at 5% increase. Now, when I talk about the politics of it, we're talking about the economics.
Right.
The economics. Okay. All right. So is there anything that we need to cover before we jump right into? We had a bunch of bullet points to go through.
Okay. So if you're concerned about rent control and what that's going to do to your bottom line, and you're an investor and you're interested in selling your property,
Yes.
We're your people. We're happy to sell your properties.
Yeah.
But before you put your properties on the market, maybe we need to educate you a little bit about what is being proposed and the impact on your property.
Okay, first of all, let's go through some of these bullet points. Rent control. What is rent control? Like, what does that mean?
Okay, so it means that normally your rents go up or down according to market value, right? So if there are a lot of rentals on the market, then maybe your rent might go down or stay the same. Maybe if there are not a lot of rentals on the market, maybe your rent will go up. So that sort of thing. So market value is what happens with rent. Rent control is just the opposite of that. It is dictated by outside forces, not the market. Generally speaking, it's the government. They're helping you again, and they're dictating how much your rent can go up, how frequently, maybe if there are caps, all kinds of things. And probably the best example for rent control that I'm aware of is one of our favorite cities, New York City.
Yep.
New York City has probably the most stringent rent control in the nation. And so that's a prime example of what happens with rent control.
We have some specific examples that deal with New York City. We have a lot of friends there. I've known people that have lived there a long time. So we've kind of have lived this with them there. Okay, let's talk about this. Rent control results in a drop of the supply of homes in a market. Why is that?
Okay, so what's a good answer for that? Put something in the comments, okay? All right, so what happens? Well, if you have rent control, then as an investor, maybe a builder investor, you're not as likely to put up housing that is subject to rent control. So if you're not putting up units that are subject to rent control, then that diminishes the housing supply. So there you go. Now, what happens to property values? Well, if you are one of these landlords that has these rent control units, then you're not able to sell them as readily either, because investors will have other investment vehicles where they would rather place their money, where they're going to get a better rate of return than whatever that rent control is.
Okay. So imagine this. So we've had a couple investors the last few years who've said, hey, they only want to buy new construction. So if you're a home builder and you have a lot less people buying, then maybe instead of building 5 subdivisions in a year, you build 3. Mm-hmm. So you have actually less homes built because there's less incentive for people to want to get into creating the force that would cause a builder to build new construction. The other thing too is, remember, if builders not constructing new homes, that means that tenants do not have the opportunity to move into a brand new house as a tenant. Instead, they're moving into old house, which is the second point. Rent control leads to lower quality housing. Now, we've heard a lot of this one where I've talked to a bunch of people who said, well, if I can't raise rents, I'm never fixing up the place. Like, I won't paint it. I won't change the carpets. I'll just put a new tenant and say, hey, then you're going to live in a dumpy place. Mm-hmm. And, you're not going to get a lot of people willing to dump a bunch of money into a property, then be told, oh, you can't raise the rent.
Right. So when somebody owns a rental property, they're looking for a rate of return. So if that rate of return isn't there, then they're less likely to make investments in that property. So an example of that would be, you might enter into a rental agreement, and your rental agreement might say something like, the washer, dryer, refrigerator are there as a courtesy. If they break, then you will be charged for their repairs. The owner will not pay for the repairs. Okay, so because the owner can't afford to pay for the repairs because they can't raise rents and they can't keep up with that. Look, appliances are expensive, and if you're renting your place for $2,000 a month and you have to replace a washer, dryer, refrigerator, that's more like $4,000 worth of goods. You can't raise the rent enough at 5% to make up for those appliances.
So a good example is New York City. So imagine you live in a rent control building in New York City. Now, you probably are locked in on some super low rent. you're probably trapped in the unit because you couldn't go rent a new unit. And the way a lot of this rent control works is, as long as you stay there, they have a very strict limit on how much they can raise your rent. But as soon as you move out, the new person, they can reassign a new rent. So here's an example. You've been in a place for 20 years and you just had it and you're leaving the city. You get married, you got a job transfer somewhere else. You say, I'm giving up the rent control department. I'm out of here. Your new landlord goes, market value is $3,000 a month. I know you've been paying 12, but they put it on the market now for 3,000. So now the new person has to pay 3,000. So you're effectively trapped there. Here's a specific example of how that would work in New York City. You moved to New York, you got a job, you worked at a restaurant, you rented a place. Let's just say your rent's $1,200. And you're in Queens, you're maybe even out maybe near JFK, that part of town. And all of a sudden your restaurant closes and you find a job at a really nice restaurant that you really like. And it's on the Upper West Side. And so you go look for apartments on the Upper West Side, and a comparable apartment's $3,000. You have a choice. You could stay in your place in Queens for $1,200, or you could go to move to the Upper West Side. So you say, I'll just take the train. Well, there's a cost, even though it's not very much. Probably, I think it's $3 to take a train ride in New York City, $2.75, $3, right? But the problem is 40-minute train ride now to get to work. Like you got to take a train 40 minutes. You're sitting on a subway train for 40 minutes each way. And although you're not doing anything, your basically time is wasted. So you're having to get up 40 minutes early maybe, or if it's a restaurant, you're working evening shift, you're getting on the train maybe at midnight or 1 a.m. after they close, take a train 40 minutes to then walk through Queens at 2 a.m. to get back to your place where rent control's basically trapped you in your place, right?
Well, see, one of the concerns with that is sort of like your example, but you rent an apartment and the apartment is, whatever it is, and you're single, but then you couple up with somebody and now you need more space, but you're in this apartment that's got, you're getting a really good deal, okay, and maybe one or two kids come along, and I mean, you're just in the situation where you're in this apartment, it's hard to give that up, but this apartment no longer meets your needs. So that's another form of trapping you in a place economically in that way. The other thing that happens is if you go out, like Todd said, to go get a different apartment, now there's this huge gap between what you were paying and what you're being asked to pay for another apartment that actually does meet your needs. So it's that sort of thing. It really prevents mobility. And mobility is super important because it's part of our quality of life, right? As we're in different stages of our lives, that mobility is very valuable.
Here's another thing too. Let's say you have a building and it's an apartment building, and all of a sudden you get this rent control and you realize that your ROI is now not as good as it was, and you probably have loans on it, so you're having to pay off these loans and refinance the loans every 5 years. And you come to the conclusion that, you know what? It's better to just convert the apartment building to condos. This happens many places in New York City. And just sell the condos. Someone could buy the condo unit, but you sell it.
And the other thing is you don't even have to sell all of them.
Yeah, you can. There's actually some buildings where they keep like the top, 2/3 of the building, and they turn those into condos, and then the bottom third they leave as apartments maybe. So you all of a sudden have, which is good for people that are buying, maybe people moving that want to buy. But if you're a lifelong renter, some people are just not going to buy for whatever reason. They either don't make enough to qualify, they don't want to buy, they just want to be renters. Now it makes it harder. We had this problem in San Francisco too with waiting lists. People were having to do what I said before. They had to get a place really far away or get like 4 people in one place and sleep on couches. And quality of life is really not very good. It's anytime the government interferes like this in the free market, it generally isn't better. Like there's not a lot of examples where government came in and said, oh, we're going to cap this thing, especially something like rent.
Right. So, there are a lot of unintended consequences. While the thought may be well-meaning, the unintended consequences sometimes are a lot worse than what the problem they're trying to solve.
Right. So for this to happen, first of all, the cities have done this. This is not a new thing. That let's try it out and see how it goes. I think Portland, Seattle, parts of Seattle, New York City's the big one. They have super rent control. You could go on Zumper.com, Z-U-M-P-E-R. You can go on Zillow too, and go see what a rental is and see what you can get for, $3-4 grand. You're not going to get very much. It's going to be probably a studio, and the reason is because if you're trying to move into a place, the owner has to make up for the rent control of the other units that are potentially locked up. The other problem is, you say, why are they so expensive? It's because the lack of supply. This is a real thing. Nobody wants to build apartments. Like, nobody's building there are 0 apartment buildings being constructed in New York City. 0.
Well, right. So
they're building condos.
They're building condos. They're also trying to convert office buildings. So they're doing all kinds of things. But they're going to developers will do whatever's going to turn a profit. They're in this to make a profit. They're not in this to lose money. And at 5%, that is a money-losing proposition. I mean, 5% doesn't even keep up with inflation, right? If you've been around for the last couple of years, that does not even keep up with inflation. So that is a huge issue. When we realized that this is just a proposal, we just wanted to kind of point out some of the unintended consequences of this type of policy. We understand that this is not the law of the land, but it is a possibility. And the more things like this are discussed, the more likely they are to take root in different communities. And it's important that people understand the ramifications of these types of policies.
So the other thing that happens too is people say, okay, fine, I'll just convert it into a short-term rental. Now, New York City famously went and banned a bunch of short-term rentals, and guess what? They became monthly rentals. I think 28 days or something in New York City is the time limit for short-term rental. So it did push some more people into hotels, but a lot of people just purchased them would do a monthly rental. And of course, monthly rentals probably furnished is probably a lot more. The average person can't just go do a monthly rental in New York City. They're super expensive. Especially, if you're going to be in New York City for 3 weeks, you're better off just getting a monthly rental than going to a hotel for 3 weeks.
Right. I mean, that happens here in Las Vegas. We have lots of communities where monthly rentals are the minimum that's allowed. And we see that during special events where people will rent out the house for the month, even though they're only here for maybe a week or so for the event. So Formula One is a prime example. There were lots of homes that were up for rent for the month, but they were only really occupied by the visitors for a week, give or take. So we do see that. Look, the market is kind of like water. It will find a way. It will find a way. It will. And this thing with the 5%, the thing that concerns me about it is that it will actually hurt the most vulnerable, right? It will hurt the people who can afford it least, because these are people who need lower rents, but then because the owner of the property now can't turn a profit by keeping up the property, maintaining it, doing improvements, providing nice appliances and that sort of thing, then these people are stuck in these homes or these apartments, whatever they are, that are substandard, really. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's what they're going to be. They don't start out that way, but they become that over time when the landlord simply doesn't have the rate of return to make improvements.
There is, in grad school, we talked about this economic thing called excess burden of a tax. This is a de facto excess burden because of all the other things it creates. People think they're getting this great deal. Oh, hey, rents will be capped at 5%. But what's interesting is if you don't count 2021 and you go back over the last decade, rents went up like 4.8% or something per year on average. So you're still not really, it's not like everyone scores, woohoo, rent's only gone. We talked about this before. If rents were $2,000 this year, then next year they're $2,100. It's only 5%. So if you're in Vegas, a median rent is $2,000 something. Your landlord can still raise your rent $100 a month. And remember, if you own a house, you have no rent increases because you have a fixed rate on your mortgage. and everything. So the excess burden and all the unintended consequences generally, and then there's ways to get around this, right? Well, we've seen this where we had took over a big property management account, and the tenants were saying, oh, the old property manager was charging the tenant a property management fee.
Right.
Like we charge the owners to manage their property management fee, but the property manager was telling the tenant, oh, if you want to stay in the house, you got to pay me a property management fee.
Right. So, so there are ways around it. So you can charge for property management fees. You can charge for HOA fees. The same way that we charge for utilities, we can charge for HOA fees. We can charge for all kinds of different maintenance fees, and I mean there are all kinds of fees that you can charge in order to generate more revenue. So it's just a roundabout way of getting there, and that does not mean that then the tenant gets a better product. So that's kind of what I'm circling back to. Landlords will find a way to make ends meet most of the time, but that does not necessarily mean that they will find a way to generate enough money in order to continue improving the properties if they are not allowed to raise rents to market rents. So this is an interesting concept. Let us know what you think about this. We're not trying to be political or controversial about it. We're just interested in this as people who do own rental properties. By the way, this would not apply, at least right now. The proposal is that it would not apply to people like us who don't own a vast number of units. However, for those of you that know your history a little bit, you may remember that the income tax started out as 1% and started out only for the very wealthy.
It was 0.5%.
I'm sorry, 0.5%.
And the top 1% of income earners.
Okay. And now we know that, 100 years later, it applies to all of us.
Everybody.
So, do keep in mind that whenever government gets involved and puts out programs like this, they may only impact a small portion of investors, but over time that grows to probably everybody. So it is really important that you be educated and you understand this so that you can make important choices for yourself, both for your investments and other choices that you make in your life.
Yeah.
Okay, so leave us your real estate related notes. We like to read them. Remember to like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the video, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye.
Bye.